Another wild week.
Purdue does this. I guess we should just not be surprised. Undefeated Purdue, the most powerful thing in college football.
I gotta tell you, I know we'll get to Purdue, but
yeah,
I just watched that game from an offensive standpoint, and O'Connell is really, really good.
It's amazing, right? It's a walk-on. I mean, and I say this with all deference to walk-ons.
Hey, listen, I mean, nobody wanted us. We just have to work our way in. But he's really the difference. He truly is in the game that's being called. But we'll get to it.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah. Let's start with our big story. And that big story is what happened to Michigan State against Purdue. They, of course, fell in that game. They came in boasting the number 3 ranking in the CFP. They left with their first loss of the year. It was the only real true shocker of the weekend involving the CFP top 10. But it is fair to say the group was a little bit underwhelming. Number 2 Alabama had 6 rushing yards in its win over LSU and its already fired coach. Not on one play. That was for the game. Cincinnati needed a fumble into the end zone to hang on against Tulsa. Oregon was in a tight game throughout against a below-average Washington team. Ohio State wasn't great, as we know, so it's a bit of a mess. We're going to do a deep dive on the Spartans in just a minute. But big picture, I want to talk about this from a Big Ten point of view first. The playoff rankings come out tomorrow. What order would you expect to see the 3 Big Ten teams who are really in the hunt here? Ohio State, Michigan State. What order would you expect to see them in?
Well, this committee last week showed us that they really value head-to-head. Mm-hmm. So I would think that there's not that clear separation that would go away from that. So therefore, I think you've got to probably have Ohio State near where they were last week, and then Michigan State right ahead of Michigan. The committee also likes Michigan. They put them on number 7 despite that loss. So is Michigan State 6 right ahead of them? I mean, they're all going to be bunched in that group, and Michigan will be the bottom level. But I would think they would all still be in the top 7.
I would not at all be surprised if Michigan was ahead of Michigan State.
Really?
They made a whole point last week about head-to-head.
But that was last week, right? It was last week. Yeah. I would not be surprised. I mean, they would be right behind each other or playing each other.
But that would be worse. If they put them right behind them.
I just think I would not be surprised. I wrote it down. I was like Ohio State, Michigan, MSU.
And the explanation would be, it was a really close game, as we talked about all last week. It was one play here or there. The game was at Michigan State. I mean, I hear everything that you are saying, Nicole. I suspect
they have to.
Okay, so what if it was a different question? What if the question was, who do you think's better?
Well, that's a different question. But here's the thing. We're trying to say that the games that get played should impact a playoff, right?
Right.
Like that results from this season should matter. Yeah, that was a whole week ago. You're going to throw it out. This isn't even like, Ohio State's a lot better since they played Oregon. Let's forget that. That was weeks ago. No, this was last week.
Yeah.
You can't throw it out. You can maybe later in the year, if Michigan beats Ohio State and beats Penn State, and you say their resume is here. Yeah. Michigan State has lost a couple games. We don't have to use that head-to-head. But you can't do it right now when they're both one-loss teams.
I think it's an excellent question. Who's better right now?
Well, I think because that's kind of the question you're answering, right?
But they're not going to. They won't do that in their ranking.
I think right now.
Yeah.
Michigan's, after last week, Michigan's better.
Michigan played very well in that game. Should have won the game, too.
Yeah. Right. Hey, this is going to be fun.
Well, it's going to be fun, but it's also going to get ugly tomorrow, because let's just be honest with what we are watching in college football this year. There is one elite team. That doesn't mean they're going to win the national championship. They could lose a game, but Georgia's really, really good.
Yes.
And everyone else has obvious flaws. And you could go down that whole list. I mean, I'll say it again. Alabama ran for 6 yards against LSU and its fired coach.
Uh-huh.
Total.
Whole game. Their offensive line has issues, guys. And then, again, look, we can pick apart some of these Big Ten teams. Ohio State hasn't been playing great. I mean, Oregon, they needed a botched punt snap against Washington to put that game away. Cincinnati against Tulsa, who isn't bad. I mean, Tulsa gave Ohio State a decent game, but I mean, good Lord.
We are so fickle, right? In one moment, we want those dominant teams out there so we can just say, hey, you know what? It's them. And this is really boring because it's just them.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And now, when college football is giving us everything we want,
yes,
everybody has an opportunity to get in the middle of this race. It's like, wow. I don't know. This is really disgusting. All these other places they got flaws. They don't know what they're doing.
Okay, and so here's what I would say to Kyle, because I 100% agree with you, right?
No,
This
I
is
like
far
the
more
flaws.
interesting.
Yeah, I like the flaws.
It's far more interesting, but the problem is we got to come up with 4 teams, right? And then everyone's going to argue about who gets left out.
You know what the hard part is right now is someone has to do a top 10 on Saturday nights. Number 2. Who is
Hypothetically, do you know anyone who's in that spot?
Who do you put number 2 in the country right now? That's been the hardest spot all year long.
Who did you put this week?
Cincinnati. I kept them there.
Really?
I'm not going to change my voting just because the selection committee is not giving them credit.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
But I mean, Nicole, they have not looked good here the last few weeks.
You sound like Gary Parda now.
I have a lot of respect for Gary Parda.
The other teams haven't looked good either.
No, they haven't. I don't know who I'd put there either.
That's what I'm saying. 2 is a really hard spot right now because there's such a big gap.
Right.
There's such a gap.
But, you talk about Alabama, LSU, and I know LSU has got their issues coaching-wise, player-wise. They've got all that. But you think those guys aren't going to get up with an opportunity to play Alabama? With a chance that they think that they're going to be able to...
But Alabama didn't look good.
Yeah, I understand that, but LSU had a little something to do with that, right?
I've got to say,
I
thought Alabama was going to annihilate them, right? LSU didn't have enough guys to practice, supposedly, right, a week ago. I mean, I thought that was going to be like 7 touchdowns.
They're flawed, just like everything.
Yes.
The thing about this season is we have one great team.
Yes.
We have a bunch of teams that I think are pretty good, but they're not good all the time. And that's why we have games like this. But everybody had ugly wins this week. So if you're the selection committee, do you just basically leave it exactly the same as last week because you didn't learn that much about anyone individually?
I think that's the safe way to do it because otherwise you're going to be in a spot where you're contradicting yourself. At least you hold fast and you say, well, this is what we believed a week ago. No one played particularly well outside, honestly, like Michigan played well in the top 10. But I mean, there weren't many games where you would say, well, I'm in a really...
And I think really what happens is you allow the season to play out.
Which is...
Because a lot of this is going to sort itself out.
Right. Like, we'll know who's better between Ohio State and Michigan State once this whole thing's over.
Yeah.
And that's why there is a little bit of a charade made-for-TV element to
a little?
What we're doing. Well, I like a lot of those people.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm just saying, I mean,
but when you do it week to week,
no doubt.
And it's
really
not just
hard.
a one check-in, then we do have to react on a weekly basis. And are there knee-jerk reactions this week? I'm not sure, except I will say the ACC is out. I think we know that.
Yes, the Wake Forest thing
lost,
removed any doubt.
And the ACC is out. So that sets up some interesting potential open spots. We talk about, 2-loss champion or even Cincinnati, right? Like, you need things like that to happen. The ACC off to the side.
Okay, what about this? What about with the Big Ten? It's something I started thinking about. I actually have been thinking about it for a while because, as Howard knows, I worry about everything there is possibly to worry about in the world. And one of the things that has concerned me, when you have this many teams that are good and you don't have any that are truly great, and again, that's not an indictment of them any more than it's an indictment of saying Alabama isn't great either, and you can go down the list, right? Again, there's one great team. And so you run into this possibility of what if they all beat one another and you have this chaos, and at the end of it, you don't have any teams in the Big Ten, which is indisputably one of the 2 best leagues in college football. The SEC and the Big Ten, in whatever order you want to put them, are the 2 best leagues, are the only 2 good leagues in college football. But what if you end up with no one with fewer than 2 losses? No one's ever made the playoff with 2 losses, as we know. I'll put this to you first, Nicole. I'm interested in your opinion too, Howard. What would happen here?
Well, again, none of this happens in a vacuum, so you'd have to be assuming that there's some chaos in some other places, but that's the scenario where you get a 2-loss champion in, right? It's coming from a conference that you believe is strong, that they would have top 25, top 10 wins on their resume, that they would have stuff that would offset those losses. We've seen the committee value really good wins and kind of discount losses. That happened to Oregon already this year. Alabama, it's as if they didn't lose a game. They're sitting at number 2. They would have been at number 2 anyway, okay? So there are ways to offset that. Brand names help, as we know, even though they'll tell us they don't. But when we've seen those teams like Ohio State and Alabama make the playoff as non-champions, it's kind of been the same thing, right? They have to kind of get that loss discounted. I know we've been headed towards this. We absolutely should have a 2-loss champion. Like, some of the reasons we haven't had it is because the committee didn't want to do it, just like on principle. But we've had really good 2-loss conference champions that should have been in the mix. So I think that is a scenario that is fine. I think that is okay. I still think you could say that is one of the 4 best teams in the country.
And that's the key. Is it one of the 4 best teams? And if it's coming from one of the best conferences,
exactly,
then I think it's okay. But the problem is we've always looked at it as there's no way a 2-loss team can go.
But it
can't do it. Can't do it that way.
But you have to, so that people schedule better. Because if you do this and it's Ohio State, let's say it's Ohio State, then it says, yes, it's good that you went and played Oregon. Like, that didn't knock you out.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here, because this has been my complaint all along, is that when this thing was announced, they said strength of schedule is going to matter, and people did scramble to schedule these higher profile games, and there has been zero reward for it.
Yes.
All they do is look at that loss column, and when you get to 2, you're out. And so, look, I agree with you. I have believed all along. I thought, foolishly, because I obviously follow the NCAA basketball selection committee very closely, and that really rewards strength of schedule. And so I believe that this would be in that same mold. And because they said it would be, and then it hasn't been. Hey, I don't want to leave without talking about Michigan State here. So what do we make of Michigan State after this loss to Purdue? A loss in which the secondary was torched, and they've now given up the most passing yards per game of any team in the country. Again, we know they face a ton of plays, and on a yards per play basis, they're not that bad and all that, but they were bad. They were bad on a yards per play basis. They were bad on an overall yards basis against Purdue. And then offensively, I mean, look, they were without Jalen Naylor. One of their weapons was gone, but especially when they got in the red zone, they weren't great.
Peyton Thorne played pretty good football, though, right? I think from the quarterback position, he was pretty good. So I think he did his job. And I know, going back and watching them from a defensive standpoint, I don't know that there's a quarterback that can do what O'Connell did to them, still left on the schedule. And I mean that. And Ohio State is
C.J. Stroud?
He can't do what O'Connell did to them.
Wow.
I'm just telling you, he can't do that. And it's not. And I'm not saying he doesn't have the tools to do that. I'm saying that I don't believe he's been in the system long enough to know where that ball necessarily needs to go on time and be that comfortable in the pocket to be able to do it. Remember, this is a Purdue team who is light years better on the defensive side.
Yep.
So they're going to create some pressure. But getting back to Michigan State, I don't think they're as bad defensively as we perceive them to be. Yes, they're giving up plays, but they were picked apart. And that's really what it was. Something that's happened. They just have to find ways to make plays offensively, more plays on the offensive side. Defenses, I think they're just who they are.
Purdue is one of the top 5 in the league in defense, right? Like they have drastically improved on that side of the ball. But Howard, I'm going to say that C.J. Stroud doesn't need to be perfect against that secondary. I think there was enough that we saw that was concerning about the explosive plays and how open guys were. And again, like I get that Aiden O'Connell was phenomenal, but David Bell is a guy you knew could be a problem coming in, and he just kept getting open and open and open again. So that's where I get concerned when you look at the weapons on Ohio State and all these other things. So I'm still going to be concerned about it. Again, they were limited on the ground a bit more than we're used to seeing, et cetera, et cetera. But Purdue has a good defense. I'm more concerned about Michigan State's defense.
Yeah, I just think that, when you start to talk about, to me, who can affect their defense like that, who can cause problems. And yeah, they have weapons, but if you're not using the entire field, I'm getting on Ohio State right now, if you're not using the entire field, then those weapons aren't a factor. If you're not using the quarterback in the quarterback run game, then the quarterback's not a factor. So now I can hone in on what's happening with Henderson, not to focus there.
So what you're saying is Michigan State's bend but not break defense sets up pretty well against a team that struggles in the red zone.
I'm just saying I just don't think Michigan State is as bad as I thought on Saturday night after watching the tape.
Why don't we do this? Let's take a quick break. I want to dive into more of what you're saying about Ohio State, because it is really interesting to me. They have not played well here over the last couple of games, again, by their standard. Yeah. So what do we make of the close call against the Huskers? Talk about that next. Pretty cool story yesterday in Big Ten field hockey as Rutgers topped Michigan 1-0 to win the conference championship. It was Rutgers' first ever Big Ten tourney title in any sport.
Wow.
came in front of a record home crowd of more than 1,600 fans in Piscataway. And when you win the best conference in the country, you become the #1 seed in the NCAA tourney. Rutgers doing just that. How about the Big Ten securing each of the top 4 seeds in the tournament? In all, 6 Big Ten teams earn spots. They'll get going for the tournament overall on Wednesday, but the Big Ten teams start on Friday. Final 4 in Ann Arbor with the championship game slated for November 21st. That is a dominant league.
Is that good? Is that good?
Pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I want to get into some more football results from the weekend. We kind of started down this Ohio State path, and I want to continue down it. So what do we make of the Buckeyes? And look, again, we always talk about this with Jerry and with Joshua. Ohio State is held to the standard of national championship because that's the standard they hold themselves to. There was a stretch of about 4 weeks where they looked every bit of a national championship team.
Right.
But now these last couple games, they play better defenses, and the offense has stagnated a little bit here against Penn State and against Nebraska. Now, part of it is those are good defenses. But what are you seeing? I know you've already been studying tape on Ohio State's offense. You were talking about it a bit with Stroud. What do you see?
To me, I just don't think they want him to be a major part of the run game. So I think there are opportunities where he can run the football that would help open up some things for this run game because we know how dominant it is. But many, in the same kind of way we talk about the Badgers and them being able to run the ball, they need to get the quarterback involved a little bit, and it didn't really happen for them. I think Ohio State needs to do some of that. And I know they have to protect their quarterback because he's a young quarterback, and the next guy in, oh, by the way, he's young too. So you got one young guy that you've gotten up to speed, so I think you need to keep him as healthy as possible. But when you watch, it just seems like if you are also in the pass game, if you're the slot receiver, if you're to the 3 receiver side, you're the middle receiver there, you're probably going to be the one that's getting the ball. If you're to the wide side of the field or to the short side and it's one-on-one situation there and there's no safety over the top, he's probably getting the ball because he's going to the matchups where he thinks the best matchups are. But sometimes that can get a little bit predictable. And the offensive line isn't playing as great as they probably should be right now. But I think that's just a product of, you're going 3 and 4 wides all the time and you're asking these guys to block and they're adding extra people into the box in run situations. So I think they have some things they have to work on, obviously, and I think they can fix them. But I think adding that quarterback into the run game would help some of the issues that they're having.
Yeah, I think we've been seeing some issues in the run blocking and then also some improvement in the run blocking. Yeah. But that's been a problem in the red zone as well, right? This is a team that is just struggling to run the ball, but they're also just struggling as an offense when the field is compressed, which you mentioned. Yeah. They've got all these playmakers that are great in space. When the space is constricted, it becomes easier to defend. And they're also, again, they have played against, like, Penn State's a great red zone defense. Nebraska is a much better defense than people realize across the country, considering the team's record. But that's a problem because they're going to be in situations where they're going to need touchdowns in the red zone in some of these games down the stretch. And they got to figure out how to do it, and they got to figure out how to run the ball in that part of the field. Yeah,
and I'm not saying that Stroud has to be a running quarterback. I know quarterbacks today, they want to throw because they want to go to the next level. I get it. I understand it. I just think when you talk about getting into the red zone, he's got to be a threat in that situation. Got to be a threat.
And to your point, 2 touchdowns in their last 9 red zone possessions over these last 2 games, and just 4 touchdowns in their last 27 possessions overall. I mean, we are 2 weeks removed from sitting on this desk and talking about them scoring 150 points in 156 plays. Now, again, a lot of it is a function of who they have played, and so Nicole, to your point, I mean, look, Nebraska is as confounding a team as you are going to find. You look at them defensively, they are really good. Even their offensive numbers are really good, except for turnovers and the inability to kick field goals. And, they just kind of have this way of shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, they are 1-6 now in conference play, and they have outscored their conference opponents, right? That is really hard to do. Obviously, they absolutely throttled Northwestern, and so that throws it off. But it shows you how many close games they played against really good teams. I mean, they played Michigan close. They played Michigan State close. They played Ohio State close.
Oklahoma.
I mean, for all of their flaws, Oklahoma is
but still,
undefeated.
It's I think that's one of the other keys to it. You talk about that defense. They are athletic and talented on that side of the ball. There's no question about it. You watch them moving around. JoJo Dolman, oh my word.
He was phenomenal on Saturday. He was unbelievable.
Everywhere. There's one play. He's probably run 60 yards, it ends up being a touchdown, but he's hustling the entire time. He's in the run game. He's involved. This is a very athletic defense. So, yeah, they're going to give teams some problems. They just find a way to lose games, right? Whether it's dumb penalties, whether it's a turnover here and there, they just can't get over the hump at this point.
27 points from offense and special team mistakes this year. You talk about how close they've been and and they've been in all these one-score games, and that's what's cost them. The defense has not cost them games.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they
Which if you're not
mistake.
actually watching this, you just think theirs is a bad football team.
Yeah, but
right?
the defense is good.
I think from afar, people think this is just a bad football team.
Right.
I think it's not. That's not the case. They just do some things that aren't very smart at some bad times.
Yeah, it's amazing the degree to which they find ways to lose. But again, 7 losses by a combined 42 points against a really challenging schedule.
Yep.
As to what happens, I mean, look, Nebraska's going to be a fascinating story to follow here down the stretch. They have the bye week and then a couple games left, and then we'll see what the determination is on Scott Frost's fate. But Eric Shenander, and we've talked about this now for a few years, like they have progressively gotten better and better. They've gotten to the point where it's an elite defense. But I would still say the flip side of that is if you're Ohio State and your threshold is your measuring stick is we're going to try to win a national championship, and if we don't win a national championship, then by our standards, it's not as successful a year as we would like for it to be. You're going to have to do it against elite defenses.
Georgia is waiting.
They're elite.
They're elite too.
Yeah,
they're a problem.
They're actually the elite of the elite.
Yes,
they're a little bit of a problem. I'm just going to kind of leave it there.
Yeah. It's not a problem anyone's going to deal with in the Big Ten yet. But it may be. It may be. And in the meantime, you need to figure it out. You need to figure out a way to get Travion Henderson more involved, as you say.
Yep.
Maybe Stroud in the run game, fix the offensive line a bit, become less predictable in the passing game, all those things.
They have guys in that receiving room, we've heard coaches talk about it, that they're 4 or 5 true first-round picks in that room. And I just know that in times when you look at them from an offensive standpoint, the ball's probably going to the short side of the field. And if I'm looking at that, I know the guys that are getting paid millions of dollars know that. Yeah. So I'm just saying they got to figure it out. And they will, because it's a good coaching staff. So it's just, they just got to get it done.
And you self-scout.
Yeah,
especially when things aren't going well. Yeah. You spend a little time figuring out, okay, what's happening with us. And, of course, they have some huge games left on the schedule, including one at the end of the season against their arch rival, the Michigan Wolverines. They were the Big Ten playoff contender that probably looked the best this weekend. We'll take a closer look at Jim Harbaugh's team as they prepare to venture to Happy Valley. Congratulations to the Michigan women's soccer team. Top Rutgers 1-0 yesterday to capture the conference tournament title, the first for the school in 22 years. The NCAA tourney selection shows this afternoon several other Big Ten teams, including the Scarlet Knights, expected to get invites. As for the Wolverines football team, they bounced back nicely from the loss to Michigan State. They topped Indiana 29-7 Saturday night. Luke Schoonmaker, 2 TD catches, exceeding his career total coming in. Got the run game going with Hassan Haskins' career high 168 yards. D held the Hoosiers under 200 yards. Really a very good all-around effort. And
before you start that, how about the shot of the trophy sitting on the plane?
Yeah.
Secured.
It gets its own seat.
Secured.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It should have had a mask, though. You know how you're supposed to fly with masks now?
Yeah.
Okay,
was it in first class, the trophy?
Well, couldn't really tell, but it didn't look like they needed first class.
Yeah.
It's nice and slim.
There it is.
No, that's
nice and slim.
That looks like Comfort Plus, though.
I think it's got a middle seat.
But it's Comfort Plus. I think it's got leg room.
Right.
I think there's leg room.
Good stuff.
Well, I'm happy for the trophy either way.
Me too.
Yeah. I wonder when the last time it had flown was. Okay. So what did you make of Michigan in that performance?
I went into this game saying that this is the type of game that Michigan, yes, I know how good Indiana plays defensively, how well they play against Indiana, but Michigan has better players, right? And I thought they should be able to dominate and control the line of scrimmage, and they were able to go out and do that. And even when, they get a guy banged up a little bit, Haskins, he would be a stud, the number one carrier in most teams. And he's had to share time. Now, we're going to see him get a little bit more work.
Yeah, I think that's the luxury, right? When you've had two-back system and they've been your two best players, for sure, that you can weather some of this. I think there's concerns about receivers' depth. I mean, they've had to go real deep into that room with some of these injuries, but they get a lot out of their tight ends.
Yeah.
There's a lot to like. And I saw a quote from one of the players, I'm forgetting who now, said that they had to take out their frustration from the Michigan State game on someone. They kind of felt bad it was Indiana, but it had to be somebody. And it felt like that, though. It felt like they wanted to get right. They wanted to say, hey, we are still one of the best teams in the country. We know it, and this is how methodically we're going to win the game.
Okay, I'm going to nitpick a little bit, and we nitpicked on this Saturday night on the final drive. Joshua brought this up. 7 red zone field goals last 2 games. How big a concern is it, particularly with a team that runs the ball as well as they do, that has done a lot of different kinds of things in the red zone, and they've tried to use J.J. McCarthy as a weapon in there. He, again, was somewhat disappointing, I thought, in this game with a turnover. But how concerning is it that we're 2 straight games now where in the red zone they've had to settle for 3?
Well, I think it's concerning. I think I'm not as concerned as they are. But,
I think by definition we're losing less sleep than the coaches. Yeah.
But I think when you're winning, at least, it's okay. We got to get better at this. Yeah, we figured some of this other stuff out, but we really need to dial in on this if we want to continue, because they know they can't survive like that. And I think that's just part of the process. We've watched this team grow on both sides of the ball all year. So I have to believe right now that they're going to figure out a way to get better. But I think it goes to this. If you're playing against good defenses, when it gets constricted down there, it's tough to score down there right now.
Well, we talked about this, I feel like, going back to the Rutgers game, where it wasn't costing them the game, but games were closer than they should have been, and then it cost them the Michigan State game, right? So they got to figure this out, because it's not going to cut it against Penn State and Ohio State down the stretch. But this has been an issue for longer than just the last 2 games.
You mentioned skill position injuries. You talked about Blake Corum. He hobbled off in that game, kind of unclear what his status is going to be. You mentioned some other skill position injuries. Eric All is banged up. I mean, you can kind of go down the list, a bunch of the wide receivers. What's your sense of kind of where we are and how big a challenge that presents as they head to Happy Valley?
Well, I guess we'll see throughout the week as what Jim Harbaugh says about how banged up guys were. He didn't seem super concerned after the game on Saturday. He felt like they were going to get these guys back. But it's that part of the year, too, where there's wear and tear, like little things can linger and become bigger issues. But I just look at the pass catchers, right? So the tight ends and the receivers, because you started the season with Ronnie Bell going down. So you lost a leader and you lost your best player on offense, your best skill player. So they've established other guys. They've gotten guys involved, like Anthony. We saw his breakout against Michigan State. So you need them to have some health down the stretch, because you can't keep going to the well. You're going to run out of guys. You're going to have guys that are not experienced playing in big moments. So that's where I get concerned. But it didn't sound like Harbaugh thought they were going to lose all the guys that win the 10.
Yeah, I know when you talk about Josh Gaddison, we've watched him develop wide receivers. We watched it happen at Penn State. We watched it happen, at Michigan. So I know he knows what he's doing in that group, and that's the group he's really responsible for a lot of the times when he's working with them in practice. So it also becomes a time where, some guys need to get some rest, take some rest days off. You got to get more mental reps. So they've done a good job recruiting. So their players on campus, it's just a matter of how quickly can they get them prepared to go out and be able to compete. And I think that's part of why you need to be playing players during the year. It's just not, if you're the number 2 guy, the number 3 guy, you've got to get them meaningful reps during the season. So not only that they can internally have the confidence in themselves, but the people playing next to them know that they can do it as well.
Let's focus on what's next for them, and it is a game in Happy Valley against Penn State, and the Nittany Lions looked a little reinvigorated. They were in a battle with Maryland, a game that was tied in the 4th quarter, but ultimately the Terps just had no answer for Jahan Dotson. Had 11 catches for a school record, 242 yards, 3 TDs. Nittany Lions pulling away 31-14. They ended their 3-game skid. So as we look at the numbers for Jahan Dotson and trying to get Bobby Ingram, a little ambitious to get Bobby Ingram this year, I would say. But Kenny Jackson is doable, no doubt, at the rate that Dotson is catching touchdown passes. Again, all-time receiving touchdowns by Penn State players. He was outstanding. Penn State, again, they had lost 3 in a row.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of Clifford's looked much better here these last 2 weeks? It
Getting
seems
healthier.
like on that side of the ball, look, I think we just have to accept they're not going to be able to run the ball, right? I mean, they haven't had a 100-yard rushing game by a back all year. They were once again held under 100 as a team, but it does seem like, I mean, man, Dotson is a tough matchup.
He is, and they move him around. They get creative with him. He's inside the slot. He's outside. They'll run a reverse with him. If he's in a situation where he's got a safety on top of him in one-on-one coverage, oh, you better believe that's where the ball's going. You're going to get it to him because he does a great job of setting up the safeties or corners with the running his route. So he's really a tough cover for anyone. So you've got to find ways to be creative to make sure he has the ball.
Yeah, he's still, arguably the most electric player in the whole conference. I mean, he's phenomenal. I think that you guys are absolutely right. This team is getting better. They're getting healthier. Sean Clifford's getting healthier. That game against Illinois is such an aberration. It's going to be an aberration, right? Because they're going to play Michigan well this week. They're going to play well down the stretch, and they played well against Ohio State. Like, they are the team that we thought they are. They just got banged up, and they've just been dealing with some stuff. But I'm with you where I guess they're just not going to run the ball because we know that they've tried. And when you have Jahan Dotson in the passing game doing what it does, you don't need it, right? But isn't there a concern? I mean, don't you want to be closer to 50-50? Not 50-50 perfectly, but a 100-yard rusher, is that too much? Like, that seems like a low bar.
It's remarkable. One part of it is they're rotating backs in and out, and so I do understand that. But you got to collectively rush for 100 yards, and more often than not, they haven't done that, Howard.
I'll tell you this, and I said this over the summer. I still think this is the number 1 and number 2 when you talk about running back rooms.
Yeah, that's what's so
bottom.
weird.
That's what. Yeah, it is weird.
It's unbelievable that they can't get this done because it's just, I know it's offensive line is part of it, quarterback's part of it, everything's part of it, but it's amazing to have that type of talent in a room and not be able to get the production out of it that you need.
Yeah, and it's not like, hey, everyone's banged up or whatever. Had some nicks here and there, but by and large, been a pretty healthy group and just have not been able to get it done. As you say, offensive line's been an issue for a while in the run game for them.
But is it that they just want to throw it more?
I guess.
Well, this game certainly it's working. You stick with it.
Right.
Well, they better figure it out in this one coming up.
Yeah, you think so?
Might need to.
They got some guys out there on the edge. Michigan get after the quarterback a little bit.
Well, we were talking about Illinois and what they had done against Penn State. They sent the Big Ten West race into some chaos this weekend. Purdue with a huge win. We got 4 teams deadlocked, 3 weeks to go. We'll sort through it next. The Big Ten West has more teams in first place than teams that aren't in first place. A 4-way deadlock at the top. Wisconsin's the hottest team, also the only one that controls its own destiny. Already has tiebreakers over Purdue and Iowa, with Minnesota still left on the schedule. The Gophers, of course, went into last weekend on top of the division, but they lost to Illinois. Let's start there with the team that is at the top because of those tiebreakers. Wisconsin, are they your favorite right now?
Right now, I think they are, right? And you look at the defense, that's going to travel. They're going to create. They're now taking the football away and turning those into points. Offensively, they're running the ball a lot better. The quarterback's throwing it, and things seem to be coming around for them from an offensive standpoint.
Wouldn't it be something if after the way this season started and all the chaos we talked about, if Wisconsin won the West? After everything, I mean, it would be so perfect and so fitting. But I like Purdue as a chaos team. I don't think they're done messing with the way that this is going to shake out yet. I know they need some help and they can't control their own destiny.
Right.
But still.
No, I hear you. I mean, there is no reason in the world to rule out a team that has 2 wins over AP top 5 teams. Like, if you're ruling out Purdue, then you haven't been paying attention. I agree with you on Wisconsin. To me, the turnovers are a huge thing that's changing for Wisconsin, right? We are not that far removed from Wisconsin being last in the nation in turnover margin. Last in the nation about a month into the season, and now last 3 games are +9.
Well, I think we've seen them run the ball at will in games to win games. We've seen Graham Mertz have some decent games. Like, you've seen them taking some steps. They're not the team that they were at the very beginning of the season.
They're not fumbling it in the red zone. I mean, you look at some of the plays that they had versus Penn State in the red zone and where they gave the ball away. They're not making those same mistakes. They're not finding themselves in those positions. So it's gotten better. And I think you have to give the coaching staff and the players a lot of credit because I mean, we left them for dead. At least I'm like, this thing, I can't figure it out. I just don't get it.
We were up on the set Saturday night, and Jerry said something to the effect of, you got to give Paul Chris credit because he didn't panic. And I'm thinking to myself, has he ever panicked?
In his life?
What would a panicked Paul Chris look like? I'd love to see that. There you see the schedule ahead for Wisconsin. Again, it is favorable for them, no doubt. I mean, in a lot of ways, probably just comes down to that game against Minnesota. It's more challenging for Purdue simply because you have to go to Ohio State. I mean, those last two games are
they ranked in the top 5,
bottom
though?
feeders. No. Well, they're number 6. They're number 6 in the AP poll.
Do you think?
I looked at that.
Do you think that the Ohio State beat writers did that on purpose? They're like, let's rank them low because, like, if it'll save the season. If they're not in the top 5.
Yeah, so they're number 6 in the AP, and that whole top 5 thing is off the AP poll. Here is Iowa's schedule. I still think the game at Nebraska is going to be really challenging.
Yep. No doubt.
This is a pretty doable schedule for Iowa. They might have the most favorable of the group. Maybe?
Yeah, I don't know. I think Wisconsin does. I think Wisconsin does.
Well, they're second.
I mean, now because Iowa in that, that offensive situation.
Yeah, we can get into that in a minute. How good do you guys think Purdue is? Let's get into them. I mean, they are one of the most interesting teams in my mind in the country. Again, we know about these top 5 wins, right? And 17 now all time. As an unranked team against AP top 5 teams. And that's fascinating and all that. But they've now done it twice in 1 year. And when you look at their schedule, I mean, look, they played Notre Dame, right? I mean, what if they wouldn't have played Notre Dame and instead they would have put in some cream puff in their schedule? Would we be looking at them a little bit differently? I mean, they're right now they're kind of in that spoiler role, although they're certainly in this discussion to win the Big Ten West. But I almost feel like they got discounted early in the year. And now you look at them, and who wants to play them, Howard?
Nobody wants to play them. But I think, part of that whole being discounted is just because of who they are and who they've been the last couple of years. But now all of a sudden, they make the changes on the defensive side. They're excited. They, to me, have, one of the most talented defensive players in all of the country. Sure, his numbers aren't great, but this dude is a disruptor. And offensively, when they are in rhythm, it's hard to know where they're going with the football because Coach Brown, when he gets in a role calling plays, it's difficult. It is difficult to slow down. That's why, to me, it's so important that the quarterback's in a rhythm, then they're in good shape.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff Brown can call a game. We know that. They've been one of the most fun offenses to watch since he's got to Purdue. They've dealt with injuries over the years. We've seen, this year they've stayed. Aiden O'Connell has stayed healthy. David Bell has stayed healthy. We get to see them do this that we didn't always get to see. But what's interesting to me is obviously, yes, the defensive improvement has been one of the main stories there. But also, they went through a stretch where they scored 13 points in 3 straight games, not that long ago.
It's not like the offense has been overpowered.
No,
and
it's like, obviously they played up to the level of competition. But, you talk about what if moments. Like, what if they just figured this out a little earlier or got that, called the games a little bit differently, were a little more explosive, got some more points out, and the record's different. They do control their destiny in the West. I don't know, but I agree with you. I mean, they're one of my favorite teams of the season because it's been a weird season. So I love the idea that they're a team you knew had this history against top 5 teams. Mel Tucker talked about it all season, and they still did it. Like, I just kind of love that.
Yeah, he really set it up all week, right? That, hey, I'm going to make it clear to my guys that this is the history of Purdue. This is what they've done this year. This is what they've done historically. He kind of came with everything
It didn't matter.
Totally prepared. No, it didn't matter. Look, it's disconcerting to me that on average, when they hand the ball to a running back, there is no team in the country that gets less yards on average than Purdue. They are dead last in the nation
and you know
in
what?
yards per carry.
We shouldn't be concerned. Why? Because that is who they are.
No, I understand.
But they've been at the whole time.
Yeah, but they found ways to get some yardage here.
And you mentioned this Saturday, the screen game was really good. Del Root can catch the ball. Horvath can catch the ball.
And I think that's just who they are. If they find themselves in a spot where it doesn't look like we're going to match up that well, I think you're doing yourself a favor by going to the screen game and doing some different things to be creative, because it's no sense in running into a brick wall if you're not going to get any success out of it or any yardage.
Yeah, this is very different than the Penn State conversation, right, about them being more one-dimensional. This is who Purdue is and is comfortable doing it. They're comfortable winning the game, throwing the ball 50 times.
No, I agree with that, too. And you want to talk creativity, that play they ran to Jackson Anthropos.
Yeah, what do we call it?
It was great. Man, it was double flea flicker, reverse screen.
and then the offensive linemen just out there going downfield, making their blocks.
That was great. That was a great play. Okay, so it is very unlikely, though not totally out of the question, given the chaos that we've had this year, that any of these teams from the Big Ten West actually makes it to the college football playoff. You would need absolute craziness to happen in front of them. However, they certainly can impact it at a minimum by being in the Big Ten championship game and knocking someone off. So how capable do you believe that whomever it is that emerges out of the West is of actually winning the Big Ten?
Well, I'd say this, and this is how I look at them and I'm talking about Wisconsin right now. I just think they can create so much chaos with their defense that, yes, you need to score points when you start to get, conference championships. You got to be able to score some points. Maybe they'll figure that out. But nobody really can block them. And nobody has blocked them. So to me, that's why they stand out so much. And we know that the committee is probably going to respect them a lot just because of the way they play the game. The
committee respected the West a lot, right?
Yeah,
that was actually one of the things we learned last week. I mean, it was surprising to see Wisconsin and Minnesota ranked. But these are the 4 teams that we're talking about in the West are top 5 total defenses in the Big Ten. So this is a committee that values defense. If Iowa, again, their turnover luck kind of totally changed on them, but if that comes back and they become a problem for whoever they play, I mean, it could get very interesting down the stretch. But yeah, just considering, what Purdue's done, what all these teams have done, Minnesota has been up and down all over the place. Illinois, good against ranked teams. I mean,
when they go on the road.
Yeah, you can't really count out anyone from the West because they have been the chaos agents in this league.
Well, it would be fitting, no doubt. And the Big Ten West is 0-7 all time in Big Ten championship games. They've still never won one. Were it to happen this year,
they're going to do it. They got to do it at some point.
At some point,
just like the two teams,
it's going to happen.
Two lost teams.
At some point, you have to figure something's going to give.